Before we begin this incredible tale from the frozen lands of the north, hit that like button if you're ready for an epic Viking adventure. Subscribe to our channel for more Norse mythology stories, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from, whether you're in the snowy mountains of Norway, the forests of Canada, or anywhere else on Midgard. The wind howled through the ancient pines like the voices of the dishonored dead, carrying with it the bitter promise of the harshest winter our settlement had seen in 3 generations. I pulled my wolf fur cloak tighter around my shoulders as I made my way back from checking the hunting traps, my breath forming crystalline clouds that vanished instantly in the merciless cold. The snow crunched beneath my leather boots, each step sinking deep into the pristine white blanket that had transformed our familiar forest into an alien landscape of shadows and silence. My name is Ragnar, son of Thorstein the Bold, and I have walked these woods since I could barely reach my father's knee. But tonight, something felt different. The very air seemed to thrum with an energy I couldn't name, as if the gods themselves were stirring in their great halls above. The ravens that usually called from the towering spruces had fallen silent, and even the wolves that prowled these ancient hunting grounds seemed to have retreated to whatever dens could shelter them from this supernatural cold. As I rounded a massive boulder that had served as a landmark for our people since the time of my grandfather's grandfather, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, huddled against the stone's base like a discarded bundle of rags, lay the figure of a man. The stranger was barely visible beneath a coating of snow and ice that had accumulated on his dark, tattered cloak. For a moment, I wondered if I was looking upon a corpse, another victim of the merciless winter that had already claimed 2 of our elders and a young mother who had ventured too far from the settlement in search of firewood. But as I approached cautiously, my hand instinctively moving to the handle of the iron seax at my belt, I saw the almost imperceptible rise and fall of his chest. He lived, but barely. His lips had taken on the blue-grey color that preceded the final sleep, and ice crystals had formed in his tangled beard and hair. Most telling of all was his missing eye, a wound that had healed long ago, leaving behind a socket that seemed to peer into realms beyond mortal sight. The ethical code of my people was clear. No traveler should be left to die in the cold, regardless of their origin or purpose. In this land where winter could kill a strong warrior in mere hours, hospitality wasn't just a virtue. It was a sacred duty that connected us to the gods themselves. Without hesitation, I sheathed my blade and knelt beside the stranger, brushing away the accumulated snow with hands already numb from the cold. "Friend!" I called out, my voice barely audible above the wind's constant roar. "Can you hear me? The wolves will be hunting soon, and this is no place for either of us when darkness falls." The man's remaining eye fluttered open, revealing an iris of such piercing blue that it seemed to contain the very essence of winter itself. When he looked at me, I felt a strange sensation, as if he could see not just my face, but into the deepest chambers of my soul. His voice, when it came, was like the grinding of ancient glaciers, rough with cold and exhaustion. I have traveled far," he whispered, each word accompanied by a puff of vapor. "Farther than most men could imagine. The cold, it has found me at last." Without another word, I hooked my arms under his shoulders and helped him to his feet. He was surprisingly light for a man of his apparent size, and I wondered how long he had been wandering without proper food. His clothes, though well made, were those of a traveler. Practical leather and wool designed for long journeys rather than the finer garments of a jarl or wealthy merchant. "My haul is not far," I told him, adjusting my grip to better support his weight. "You'll find warm furs and hot food there, and mead to drive the cold from your bones. The journey back to my homestead normally took less time than it takes to sharpen a blade, but tonight, with the stranger leaning heavily against me and the snow growing deeper with each gust of wind, it felt like an odyssey worthy of the ancient songs." The man spoke little during our slow progress, but I could feel his gaze upon me, studying, evaluating, as if I were a riddle he was attempting to solve. My hall, when we finally reached it, stood like a beacon of warmth and life against the hostile darkness. Built in the old style by my grandfather's hands, it was a long, low structure of seasoned oak and pine, with a steeply peaked roof designed to shed the heavy snows of our brutal winters. Smoke rose from the central hearth, and the golden light spilling from the small windows promised refuge from the storm that now raged with supernatural fury. I pushed open the heavy wooden door, and we were immediately enveloped by the blessed warmth of the interior. The central fire pit crackled with split birch logs, casting dancing shadows on the carved pillars that supported the roof beams. Tapestries depicting the great deeds of our ancestors hung from the walls, their colors vivid in the firelight. The air was rich with the scents of wood smoke, drying herbs, and the remnants of the evening meal. "Sit," I instructed, guiding the stranger to a bench cushioned with thick wolf pelts near the fire. "Let the warmth return to your limbs while I prepare something to restore your strength." As he settled onto the bench, I noticed that despite his apparent weakness, there was something about his bearing that spoke of great authority. Even hunched with cold and exhaustion, he carried himself with the unconscious dignity of one accustomed to command. His remaining eye continued to study my hall with an attention to detail that seemed unusual for a simple traveler. I ladled hot stew from the iron pot that hung over the fire, a rich mixture of venison, barley, and winter vegetables that my wife had prepared before taking our children to visit her sister in the neighboring valley. The steam that rose from the wooden bowl carried with it the promise of restored vitality, and I saw the stranger's nostrils flare appreciatively at the aroma. "Eat," I said, pressing the bowl into his hands, along with a carved horn spoon. "The meat is from a stag I brought down 3 days ago, and the herbs come from my wife's garden. It will give you strength for whatever journey brought you to our door." While he ate with the careful deliberation of one whose stomach had been long empty, I retrieved my finest drinking horn from its place of honor on the wall. It had belonged to my father and his father before him, carved from the horn of an aurochs and bound with silver that gleamed like starlight in the firelight. Into this vessel I poured our best mead, honey wine that had aged in oak for 3 full seasons, until it had achieved the golden perfection that was worthy of offerings to the gods themselves. "Now then, friend," I said, settling onto another bench across the fire from him, my own horn filled with the ambrosial drink. "What manner of journey brings a man to wander alone in such weather? These forests are dangerous enough in summer, but in winter—" I gestured toward the door, beyond which the storm continued its relentless assault. "Even the wolves seek shelter when Ulla's winds blow with such fury." The stranger looked up from his now empty bowl, and I saw that the food and warmth had already begun to restore some color to his weathered face. He accepted the drinking horn with hands that I now noticed bore the calluses and scars of a warrior, but also something else, marks that spoke of skills beyond mere swordplay. "I am a wanderer by nature," he replied, his voice stronger now, but still carrying that strange quality that seemed to echo from great depths. "I travel the 9 realms, gathering wisdom and testing the hearts of men. Your hospitality honors not just me, but the ancient laws that bind all civilized peoples." He raised the horn in a gesture of respect before drinking deeply. When he lowered it, I saw something flicker in his remaining eye. Approval, perhaps, or recognition of the mead's exceptional quality. 9 realms. I leaned forward with interest. Despite being well versed in the old stories, I was always eager to hear new tales from travelers who had seen distant lands. "You speak like the wandering skalds who visit our settlement during the trading season. What news do you carry from beyond our forests?" The stranger smiled, and in that expression I glimpsed something that made my heart skip like a startled deer. There was knowledge in that smile, knowledge of things beyond mortal understanding, secrets that had been old when the world was young. "Ah, but it is not news I carry," he said, settling back against the furs with the ease of one accustomed to being a welcome guest in many halls. "Rather, I collect the stories of brave men and women who uphold the old ways, who show kindness to strangers and honor the bonds that hold our people together." Tonight, I would hear your tales, Ragnar Thorsteinsson. I started at the use of my name, which I was certain I had not yet given him, but perhaps in my concern for his welfare, I had spoken it without remembering. The mead was strong, and the warmth of the fire after the bitter cold made everything seem slightly dreamlike. My tales are simple ones, I said, refilling both our horns from the leather flask. I am no great hero or far-traveling adventurer. I hunt, I farm, I protect my family and neighbors when need arises. But if stories you wish to hear, then I know many passed down through generations of my blood. Those are often the finest tales of all, the stranger replied, his eye glinting with what might have been anticipation. For they carry the wisdom of ordinary folk who face extraordinary challenges with nothing but their courage and the blessings of the gods. And so began a night unlike any I had experienced before or since. As the storm raged outside with increasing fury, shaking the very foundations of my hall, the stranger and I shared not just mead and food, but stories that seemed to bridge the gap between the mortal world and the realm of legend. I told him first of my grandfather, Ulf the Far-Travelled, who had sailed with the great expeditions to the western lands across the Whale Road. How Ulf had faced the fury of sea monsters in waters where no man had dared venture before, and how he had traded with peoples whose skin was the color of copper and whose customs were as strange as fever dreams. The stranger listened with an intensity that made me feel as if my simple family history was being weighed and measured against some cosmic standard. "Your grandfather showed the true spirit of our people," the stranger observed, his voice carrying notes of approval that seemed to resonate in my very bones. "To venture into the unknown requires not just bravery but wisdom. Tell me, did he ever encounter the Jotuns in those distant waters?" The question sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the winter wind. Jotuns, the ancient giants who dwelt in the wild places beyond civilization, beings of immense power and often malevolent intent. My grandfather had indeed spoken of such encounters, though usually only when deep in his cups and surrounded by his most trusted companions. He claimed to have seen their ships, I admitted, reaching for my drinking horn as if the mead could protect me from the implications of such memories. Great vessels carved from single trees, with sails black as storm clouds. He said they moved against the wind itself, and that their crews sang songs that could drive mortal men mad with terror. The stranger nodded slowly, as if such tales confirmed knowledge he already possessed. The giants are ancient enemies of gods and men alike. They remember the time before time, when the world was nothing but ice and fire, and they resent the order that was brought forth from that primal chaos. Your grandfather was wise to avoid direct confrontation with such beings. But he did fight them once, I continued, the words tumbling out as if compelled by some force beyond my control. In the ice straits north of the world's edge, 3 Jotun ships surrounded his vessel, and their leader, a giant with skin like glacier ice and breath that froze the very sea, demanded tribute of gold and slaves. The stranger leaned forward, his remaining eye blazing with interest. And how did a mortal man prevail against such odds? "Cunning and faith," I replied, remembering my grandfather's words as clearly as if he sat beside me now. Ulf challenged the giant king to a contest, not of strength, for no man could match a Jotun's power, but of wisdom. He wagered his ship and crew against the giant's pledge to leave all mortal vessels unmolested for 7 seasons. "A dangerous gambit," the stranger observed. "What manner of wisdom could surpass that of beings who witnessed the world's creation?" "The wisdom of sacrifice," I said, feeling the weight of ancestral pride in my chest. The giant posed riddles of cosmic significance, the nature of time, the source of the sun's fire, the true names of the stars. But Ulf answered each with parables drawn from mortal experience. A mother's love for her child, the loyalty between sworn companions, the willingness of a hero to die for his people's safety. The stranger was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire as if seeing visions in the dancing flames. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of profound respect. Your grandfather understood a fundamental truth that even the wisest giants struggle to comprehend, that wisdom is not merely knowledge, but the application of knowledge in service to something greater than oneself. The Jotuns, for all their ancient power, are fundamentally selfish beings. They cannot fathom the strength that comes from bonds of love and duty. As if summoned by our conversation, the wind outside rose to a howling crescendo that made the heavy wooden shutters rattle in their frames. For a moment, it seemed as if I could hear voices in that wind, deep, rumbling voices, speaking words in a language that predated human speech. They grow restless, the stranger murmured, his gaze turning toward the door. The old enemy's sense changes coming. The winter grows longer each year, and the barriers between the worlds grow thin. You speak as one who knows such things personally, I ventured, emboldened by Mead and the intimacy of shared stories. Are you perhaps a priest of one of the temples, or a skald who has travelled to the great halls of the Jarls? The stranger smiled again, that same enigmatic expression that seemed to carry the weight of ages. I am many things to many people, Ragnar Torsteinsson. To some, I am a wanderer seeking wisdom. To others, I am a harbinger of change. Tonight, I am simply a grateful guest in the hall of a generous host. He raised his drinking horn in salute, and we drank together as the fire crackled between us. The mead was beginning to work its magic, warming my blood and loosening my tongue. Outside, the storm seemed to have reached a supernatural intensity, as if all the forces of winter were gathering for some great assault. Tell me of your own encounters with the powers beyond mortal ken, the stranger requested. Surely a man who dwells so close to the ancient places has witnessed things that lesser folk would dismiss as fantasy. I hesitated, for the experiences he spoke of were not ones I shared lightly, but something in his manner, the way he listened with complete attention, as if every word carried significance, encouraged me to speak of matters I had never voiced aloud. Last summer, I began, choosing my words carefully, I was tracking a wounded bear deep into the old forest, beyond the stones carved with protective runes. The creature had taken one of our milk cows, and I could not allow it to threaten the settlement. But as I followed its trail, I became aware that I was no longer alone in those woods. The stranger's remaining eye seemed to glow with reflected firelight. What manner of presence did you sense? At first I thought it was simply another hunter, perhaps one of the folk from the valley beyond the ridge. But the feeling grew stronger as I ventured deeper into the forest's heart. It was as if invisible eyes were watching my every move, judging my worthiness to walk in that sacred space. I paused to drain my horn, feeling the need for courage before continuing. Then I came to a clearing I had never seen before, though I would have sworn I knew every glade and grove within a day's walk of my home. In its center stood a great ash tree, taller than any tree has a right to be, its branches seeming to scrape the very vault of heaven. Yggdrasil, the stranger breathed, the word carrying reverence and recognition in equal measure. Perhaps, I admitted, or perhaps merely an echo of the great tree that connects all worlds. But as I stood before it, I heard voices, not the chatter of squirrels or the call of birds, but the voices of the tree itself, speaking in words that bypassed my ears and spoke directly to my spirit. The stranger leaned forward intently. What did the tree tell you? That the old compact between gods and men still holds, but that it requires constant renewal through acts of courage and honor. That every kindness shown to a stranger, every oath kept despite hardship, every stand made against the forces of chaos and cruelty, all of these strengthen the bonds that keep the 9 worlds in balance. I looked across the fire at my guest, struck suddenly by how intently he was listening, as if my simple woodland experience held significance far beyond what I had imagined. The tree showed me visions, I continued, the memories flooding back with startling clarity. I saw the great serpent that gnaws at the world's roots, growing stronger with each act of betrayal and cowardice among mortal men. I saw the wolves that chase the sun and moon, gaining ground whenever darkness triumphs in human hearts. And I hesitated, for this last vision had troubled me greatly. What else did you see? The stranger prompted gently. I saw a final winter coming, not just a season of cold, but an age of ice that would test the courage of every living thing. And I saw that when that time comes, the fate of all the worlds will depend not on the strength of gods or the cunning of kings, but on the choices made by ordinary folk in moments of crisis. The stranger was quiet for a long time after I finished speaking, his gaze lost in the depths of the fire. When he finally looked up, I saw something in his remaining eye that made my breath catch. A depth of sorrow and responsibility that no mortal man should have to bear. You have been granted a great gift, Ragnar Thorsteinsson, he said at last, to see beyond the veil that separates the everyday world from the realm of deeper truth is given to few, but with such sight comes obligation, the duty to act on what you have learned. Before I could ask what he meant by this, the wind outside suddenly died to absolute stillness. The contrast was so stark that it seemed to press against my eardrums like a physical weight. In that supernatural quiet, I could hear something that chilled me to the bone, the sound of massive footsteps moving through the snow around my hall. The stranger calmly reached for the mead flask and refilled both our horns. They have come, he said simply. The Jotuns your grandfather encountered have sent their servants to test the strength of his bloodline. Tonight, Ragnar Thorsteinsson, you will discover whether the courage of your ancestors flows truly in your veins. As he spoke these words, frost began to form on the inside of my shuttered windows, creating patterns that hurt to look upon directly. The temperature in the hall, despite the roaring fire, began to drop with unnatural speed. And in that growing cold, I heard the sound I had hoped never to experience, the deep, rumbling voices of frost giants, speaking words of challenge and threat in the ancient tongue. The stranger rose from his seat, and as he did so, I noticed for the first time that no frost touched him, despite the supernatural cold that was beginning to turn my breath to vapor. His remaining eye blazed now with a light that had nothing to do with reflected flame, and when he spoke, his voice carried an authority that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world. "Come then, children of ice and hatred," he called out, his words somehow carrying beyond the walls to the creatures that surrounded us. "Face the hospitality of a true son of the North, and learn again why mortals are not to be despised." The footsteps outside began to circle the hall with deliberate menace, and I realized that my simple act of kindness to a stranger had drawn me into events far greater than I could have imagined. But as I looked at my mysterious guest, standing proud and unafraid, despite the supernatural forces arrayed against us, I felt my own courage kindle like flame from ember. Whatever came next, I would face it with the honor of my ancestors, knowing that some tests cannot be avoided, only endured with dignity and faith. The longest night of my life was about to begin. When dawn finally broke over the snow-covered forest, I found myself alone beside the dying embers of my fire. The terrible cold of the night had passed, leaving behind a warmth that seemed to emanate from the very stones of my hall. But it was the symbols that truly told the tale of what had transpired. Carved into every wooden surface, the walls, the support beams, even the benches where we had sat, were intricate patterns of frost that had somehow become permanent, beautiful beyond description, yet speaking of powers that mortals were never meant to witness directly. They depicted scenes of cosmic significance, the great tree connecting the 9 worlds, ravens carrying messages between realms, and at the center of it all, a one-eyed figure seated upon a magnificent throne. On the table beside my drinking horn lay a simple wooden staff, carved with runes that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. Wrapped around its head was a single grey feather, the kind left behind by ravens, but larger than any earthly bird could produce. I never saw my mysterious guest again, though sometimes, when the winter winds blow fierce and the wolves sing their ancient songs, I catch glimpses of a one-eyed wanderer at the edge of the forest. And when travelers pass through our settlement with tales of their own encounters with the divine, I listen carefully to their words, knowing now that the gods still walk among us, testing our hearts and measuring our worthiness to inherit the legacy of heroes. The frost giants never returned to trouble our lands, and that winter, which should have been the harshest in memory, proved unusually mild, as if some great power had decreed that those who show proper hospitality to strangers deserve protection from the forces of chaos. But the greatest gift I received that night was not protection, but knowledge. That every act of kindness reverberates through all the 9 worlds, and that even the humblest mortal can play a part in the great story that connects all things. Sometimes, late at night when the mead flows freely and the fire burns bright, I tell this tale to my children and grandchildren. And always, I remind them that the next stranger who seeks shelter at their door might be far more than they appear. For in the north, the gods still walk among us, and heroes are made not in the moment of great deeds, but in the quiet choice to do what honor demands, regardless of the cost. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through Norse mythology. If this tale of divine encounters and ancient wisdom moved you, smash that like button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Subscribe for more legendary stories from the frozen north, and remember, the gods are always watching, and sometimes they're closer than we think.